Welcome back to the session on business research methods. In the previous session, we have discussed the research problem in much detail. We understood what is research problem, what is the difference between research problem and management decision problem, what are the various components of the research problem, and problem identification process in much detail. Now, let me move on to the next concept, that is research hypothesis, formulation of research hypothesis. As we have noticed, the last step in problem identification process is formulation of a research hypothesis. And as I have said, good research is one, or scientific research is one, which will start with a formulation of a research hypothesis. A working hypothesis will be developed by the researcher. So first let us understand what exactly is a hypothesis, how it is stated, and what are the different types of hypothesis and how it will be tested. That we will discuss under data analysis concept. Excuse me. So first let us start with discussion on what is a hypothesis. Hypothesis is an unproven statement or proposition about a factor or phenomenon that is of interest to the researcher. This is something, it's an unproven statement, and which is a proposition which will be laid down by the researcher before the data collection process. So researcher, once he defines the problem, he will assume a solution for the research problem. That itself is a hypothesis. So it is a proposition developed by the researcher, or it is an assumption about the research problem laid down by the researcher. A good hypothesis will always start with a working hypothesis. So this is a tentative statement. So researcher, before data collection and analysis of the data, he will just assume a solution for the problem. So this is a tentative solution for the problem, or it is an assumed solution for the problem. It may be a tentative statement about the relationship between two or more variables, or it could be the description about a particular variable which is under study. Now we will discuss what all are the different types of hypothesis later. In that we will come across descriptive hypothesis and relational hypothesis. So it may be a tentative statement about relationship between two or more variables. Often hypothesis is a possible answer to research question. That is a possible answer to a research question which will be tested later after collection of data, whether the formulated hypothesis is right or wrong. That is verified or tested by the researcher through data analysis, and for that various statistical tools will be used for testing of the hypothesis. And now we will discuss why this is stated, whether it is really required to state a hypothesis, or whether all research studies they start with formulation of hypothesis or not. As in the beginning session we have discussed about exploratory research. Exploratory research studies, they will not have hypothesis, because the main aim of exploratory research is to define the research problem and formulate the research hypothesis. Such type of studies are basically carried out to formulate the research problem and working hypothesis, and hence there will be no hypothesis in case of exploratory research studies. But when we take example of conclusive research studies such as descriptive research and causal research studies, they aim at drawing conclusions. They aim at testing hypothesis. So such hypothesis studies, they go for a very systematic way of data collection, analysis and hypothesis testing by using statistical tools. So not all studies will have a hypothesis, only descriptive research studies and causal research studies, and that too it's not mandatory that all descriptive research studies will have hypothesis. Some of the descriptive research studies are also carried out without hypothesis, but when we take example of causal research or experimental research, every causal research or experimental research will start with the working hypothesis, and at the later stages testing of the hypothesis. So the important role of hypothesis, we will discuss what is the purpose of defining a working hypothesis. The role of a hypothesis is to suggest the variables which are to be included in the research design. As in the problem statement, the many things we will come to know through research problem. In the previous session we have discussed research problem in much detail. In that also we have discussed what is the purpose of defining a research problem. When we clearly state the problem, half of the things are clear to the researcher, like what data we have to collect, how we have to collect, how the research study to be carried out in a proper direction. Everything will be clear with the help of a research problem. Same is the function of research hypothesis as well. Research hypothesis is, it will suggest to the researcher like what all are the variables which we will be studying. On the basis of problem only, research questions will be formulated. On the basis of research questions, objectives will be laid down, and for each objective, hypothesis will be stated. Hypothesis will be stated. So, hypothesis will suggest the variables which are included in the research design. What all are the variables which the researcher is interested in studying, that will be very clearly mentioned in the research hypothesis. It guides the researcher in right direction. When we have a hypothesis defined, clearly formulated hypothesis in hand, it will give proper direction to the researcher. The research study will be carried out in a proper track without any deviation. Because we will come to know what we aim at, what we want to study. So hence the study will be carried out in a proper direction. It determines data needs and type of research to be carried out. Like for example, if the hypothesis is, if hypothesis says that the sales are declining because of poor quality of the product. If this is a tentative hypothesis or assumed hypothesis for the problem of declining sales, then the researcher will come to know what data we have to collect. Data on sales. Sales information, sales data will be gathered either from the department or from the sales executives or from the marketing department or from the market, that is from the customers, sales information, from the retailers the sales information will be taken, and the thorough analysis of the customers will be carried out. So in this way, hypothesis will determine the data needs, what data is to be gathered and the type of research to be carried out. Like for example, if the researcher is interested in studying the reasons behind declining sales, and if he states a hypothesis, sales are declining because of poor quality of the product, then the researcher is very clear, like he need to collect information about the quality of the product, the customer's preferences towards a product, whether they like the quality of the product or not. All this information pertaining to the quality of the product and customer satisfaction towards the product. So that will be studied. So it determines the type of data to be collected and the type of research to be carried out. From the hypothesis, the researcher will come to know whether we have to go for a descriptive research or an exploratory research or an experimentation research. So depending upon the purpose of the study, depending upon the type of hypothesis, different approaches will be used by the researchers. And it is formulated in the beginning stages and tested at the later stages. After problem definition, the hypothesis will be formulated, and after data collection, when the data will be analyzed, at that phase the testing of hypothesis will be carried out. And if it becomes true, if the stated hypothesis, if it proves to be true, then it will become an accepted theory. So how to prove and disprove the hypothesis, all those things we will discuss in data analysis part. At least for now, I hope you have understood the concept of a hypothesis. In simple terms, I can say hypothesis is a guess which is made by the researcher. It is a tentative solution to the research problem, or it is a proposed solution to the research problem. So before data gathering, the researcher will define the problem and formulate the working hypothesis. So this is all about the hypothesis. Now, while designing any hypothesis, there are a few factors which must be considered, the criteria which the researcher must follow in order to formulate the working hypothesis. These are certain criteria. First one is, hypothesis must be formulated in simple, clear and declarative form. The language used must be very simple, so that even a layman who is studying the report should understand what the hypothesis is about. Technical terms, difficult words, technical jargons should not be used in the hypothesis. Even a layman must be in a position to understand the hypothesis. A hypothesis must be formulated in a very simple, clear in the sense there shouldn't be any ambiguity. It should be very precise statement. Usually it is in the form of a declarative statement. Like for example, sales manager He thinks that sales are declining because of poor quality of the product, or sales are declining because of lack of advertisement. So this is what he, as per his assumption, he is giving that declarative statement. That is nothing but a hypothesis. So it must be formulated in a simple words, clear terms, and it must be in the form of a declarative statement. A broad hypothesis might not be empirically testable. If you are stating the hypothesis in a too broad way, if it is not precise, then that might not be empirically testable. It cannot be tested on the basis of evidences, on the basis of the data. So thus it might be advisable to make the hypothesis unidimensional. You have to state the hypothesis for one aspect of the study. That is what unidimensional, and to be tested only one relationship between only two variables at a time. Like for example, if you are stating the hypothesis, sales are declining because of poor quality and lack of advertisement. So this is not a unidimensional hypothesis, because there are two independent variables you are considering in one hypothesis. That is not advisable, that is not a good hypothesis. Hypothesis should highlight the relationship between two variables at a time. Sales are declining because of poor quality of the product. This is one hypothesis. Second hypothesis, you can split and state it. Sales are declining because of lack of advertising. So in that way we have to split the hypothesis and we have to state, because each hypothesis needs separate set of data and separate analysis, and the conclusions are based on different analysis. So hence they must be defined separately. Hypothesis must be measurable and quantifiable. Whenever you are stating the hypothesis, it must be measurable and it must be quantifiable. Like for example, if you say that the literacy level in Mysuru city is 85%, if this is a hypothesis, this hypothesis is measurable. We are stating that 85% of the people are literate in Mysuru city. This is a measurable hypothesis. It is quantifiable also. How much? 85% out of 100%, 85% are literate in Mysuru city. So in that way we can say that hypothesis must be measurable and it must be quantifiable. Hypothesis is a conjectural statement based on existing literature and theories. Whenever you are stating the hypothesis, it is said that researcher, they will assume and they will state the hypothesis. It is not always true. A good hypothesis is one which is based on existing literature and theories. If you are stating that, for example, a sales manager assumed that sales are declining because of lack of advertising. If this is stated as a hypothesis, so this cannot be a perfect hypothesis unless and until it is supported by existing literature. There must be enough literature to support this hypothesis. Only then you can make it as a tentative assumption for the research problem. So a hypothesis is a conjectural statement based on existing literature and theories about the topic, and not just based on the gut feeling or intuition of the researcher. You cannot just base the hypothesis or define the hypothesis on the basis of your own feeling or on the basis of your intuition. So apart from your intuition, there must be enough studies who should support the hypothesis which you state. So that is what another criteria. The validation of hypothesis would necessarily involve testing the statistical significance of the hypothesized relationship. So hypothesis must be stated in such a way that it must be tested further in the data analysis stages. It must have statistical significance, in the sense enough statistical tools must be available for testing the hypothesis. Whenever you are stating the hypothesis, that must be tested by using various statistical tools. So that is another requirement of a good hypothesis. So with this I have just highlighted the criteria of defining the hypothesis. Now we will talk about the different types of hypothesis. So broadly, hypotheses are classified into two types. One is descriptive hypothesis and the other is the relational hypothesis. We will discuss what is a descriptive hypothesis and what is a relational hypothesis. As I have said, as the name itself indicates, descriptive hypothesis, it describes the variables under study. It just describes what a variable is in the form of a sentence. So that is what a descriptive hypothesis. This is simply a statement about the magnitude, trend or the behavior of a population which is under study. Based on past records, researcher makes some presumptions about the variable under study. Like I have stated few examples of descriptive hypothesis. Students from pure science background score 90 to 95% in a course on quantitative methods. This is a descriptive hypothesis. It is describing about the students of science background. What is their performance in a subject in a course called quantitative methods. That is stated in the form of a hypothesis. Students from pure science background score 90 to 95% in a course on quantitative method. This is an example of a descriptive hypothesis. Or else, second example, the current advertisement for the diet drink will have 20 to 25% recall rate. The current advertisement for the diet drink will have a 20 to 25% recall. This is something which is describing about the recall rate of a particular advertisement on a diet drink. Literacy rate in Mysore city is 85%. This is also a descriptive hypothesis. It is describing about the literacy level of people in Mysore city. How much it is? 85%. That is given as a hypothesis. So descriptive hypothesis is a hypothesis which is a simple statement about the characteristics, magnitude, trend, behavior of a population which is under study. It could be about an organization, it could be about an industry, it could be about a group of people, or it could be about the individuals, or it could be on anything, any living being, animals, plants, etc. So that is what the example of a descriptive hypothesis. Now we will talk about relational hypothesis. The hypothesis which will state the expected relationship between two variables. When the hypothesis is describing the relationship between two variables, then such a hypothesis is called as relational hypothesis, because it is talking about the relationship between the variables, association between the variables. If words such as increase, decrease, less than, more than are used in to explain the relationship between the variables, then such a hypothesis is called as directional hypothesis. It is directional hypothesis. It is giving the direction of relationship between the variables. Such hypothesis is also termed as one-tailed hypothesis. So one example I have quoted here: higher the likability of the advertisement, higher is the recall rate. This hypothesis, it is giving relationship between two variables. One is likability of advertisement, second is recall rate of the advertisement. Higher the likability of the advertisement, higher is the recall rate. If high is the likability, then high will be the recall rate. Likability and recall rate, these are the two variables. And this particular hypothesis is talking about if one increases, the other will also increase. Another example, if the price of the product increases, the sales of the product will decrease. This is what? A directional only, but it is not having a linear direction, inverse direction. That is, if one increases, the other decreases. So such type of hypothesis are called as one-tailed hypothesis or directional hypothesis. Sometimes researcher might not have reasonable supportive data to hypothesize the expected direction of the relationship. He is not having the enough data to state or to hypothesize the expected relationship or direction of relationship between the variables. So in that case, he will just leave the hypothesis as non-directional. There will be no direction. Such hypotheses are called as two-tailed hypothesis. Like for example, ban on smoking has an impact on cigarette sales. The researcher is not sure whether it is having positive impact or negative impact. There is some impact. He is not sure about the direction of the relationship. Such hypotheses are called as non-directional hypothesis or two-tailed hypothesis. Two-tailed is, it may be more or less. It may be positive impact or negative impact. Ban on smoking will definitely have the positive impact on cigarette sales, or ban on smoking will have negative impact on cigarette sales. It could be positive or it could be negative. So such hypotheses are termed as the two-tailed hypothesis, because one is not sure whether it is having a positive direction or a negative direction. There is some direction. It could be positive or it could be negative. Such hypotheses are called as non-directional hypothesis. So with this we have discussed about the different what is hypothesis, what is the significance of formulating a working hypothesis, what is the criteria of a good hypothesis, and then we have discussed the two different types of hypothesis. One more thing, we can classify the hypothesis into two more categories: null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. For example, if I assume this as my proposition for a particular phenomena, ban on smoking has an impact on cigarette sales. This is the researcher's hypothesis. Researcher hypothesis is always alternative hypothesis. What the researcher will assume, that will be the researcher's hypothesis or alternative hypothesis. Null hypothesis is always the negative statement. Negative statement like ban on smoking has no impact on cigarette sales. No impact on cigarette sales. Likability of advertisement and recall rate are no way related. This is again a negative statement which is called as null hypothesis. So always in a research study, researcher, they will start with working hypothesis. In other words, working hypothesis is also called as researcher's hypothesis or alternative hypothesis, and the negative statement of that will be the null hypothesis. And the very purpose of defining null hypothesis is that researcher always, they want to nullify that hypothesis, they want to disprove that hypothesis, and they want to prove that my hypothesis is correct. That may be true or may not be true. Ultimately, when testing of data, testing of hypothesis or data analysis will be carried out. So data may support the researcher's hypothesis or may not support the researcher's hypothesis. So in that way, either null hypothesis will be accepted or rejected. So I think this is more than sufficient for now about what is hypothesis and what are the different types of hypothesis. Thank you.